The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting the quiet neighborhood streets in a soft golden light. The air carried that lazy calm that comes after a long school day, when most kids were already home, scrolling through their phones or playing games. But one teenager was still out, walking home after basketball practice. His backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, a ball tucked under his arm, and his headphones played music that matched his easy stride. He wasn't in any hurry, just thinking about dinner, maybe a shower, maybe a few texts to his friends. He didn't notice the police cruiser at first. It rolled slowly behind him. Then another one turned the corner and stopped ahead. The quiet air suddenly felt heavier. The teenager looked up confused. Two officers stepped out, their faces blank but serious, one of them already resting his hand on his belt where his radio and holster were. "Hey, you there. Stop for a second," one of the officers called out. The teen froze mid-step, his music still playing faintly. He took one earbud out, unsure if they were talking to him. "Yeah, you. Come here," the officer said again, walking closer. The boy's heartbeat quickened. He looked around as if maybe there was someone else behind him, but the street was empty. "Me?" he asked quietly. "You fit the description," the second officer said. "Where you headed?" "Home," the boy said. His voice came out small. "Just came from school." "What school?" the officer asked quickly. "Westfield High." He pointed to the logo printed right on his hoodie, the same school name in bold white letters, but the officer barely looked at it. "What's in the bag?" the other officer asked. "Just my stuff," the teen said. He started to unzip it, but one officer's hand lifted sharply. "Don't reach in there. Just put the bag down," he ordered. The boy froze again. He did what he was told, setting the bag on the sidewalk. His hands felt shaky. His voice trembled when he said, "It's just my shoes and books, sir." "We'll see about that," one of them said as he moved closer, his eyes scanning the street. The boy noticed neighbors watching from their porches. A woman had stopped walking her dog. Someone across the street held up a phone. The flashing lights from the police car reflected off nearby windows, painting red and blue streaks across the houses. The sound of a police radio crackled softly. The teen wished he could disappear. He wished his mother would call him right then, just so he'd have a reason to move his hands to feel less frozen. One officer circled around him slowly. "We got a report about a young man breaking into a car 2 blocks away." "You match the description," the boy looked up, eyes wide. "That wasn't me. I just came from school." "You can call them. Coach knows me." "Calm down," the first officer said, but his tone wasn't calm at all. "We just need to ask a few questions. Keep your hands where we can see them." The teenager's palms were sweating. He tried to keep his breathing steady, remembering what his mother always told him. "Stay respectful. Stay calm, don't make sudden moves." But inside, his chest felt like it was shrinking. Another car slowed down to watch. A voice from somewhere nearby said, "He's just a kid." But the officers didn't turn around. "Do you have any ID on you?" the taller officer asked. "Yes, in my wallet." "It's in my back pocket." "All right," the officer said, stepping closer. "Go ahead." Slowly, the boy nodded and reached carefully for his wallet, his hands trembling. He could feel both officers watching his every move. He handed it over without looking up. The officer took it and stepped back toward the cruiser. "What's your name?" the other officer asked, voice sharp. He told them. His voice cracked halfway through. The officer didn't seem to care. He just kept staring at the boy like he was waiting for him to slip up. The few people watching started whispering to each other. One woman muttered, "He's wearing a school uniform, for goodness sake." The boy heard it and felt a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. He wished people wouldn't watch. He wished he could just go home. The officer with the wallet came back. "Address checks out. But what are you doing in this area?" "I live here," the boy said softly. "Down that street." He pointed, but his hand shook. The officer looked at him, then at his partner. There was a pause. Then the second officer said, "You sure you didn't see anything suspicious on your way here?" "No, sir." The silence stretched. It felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The officers glanced at each other again, then back at the boy. The taller one sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, we're gonna let you go, but you be careful, you hear? There's been trouble around here lately." The boy didn't say anything. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. When one of them gestured for him to take his bag, he bent to pick it up slowly. His fingers brushed against the pavement, cold and rough. He didn't look up again until he was halfway down the block. Behind him, the police lights dimmed and the cars drove off like nothing had happened. The boy kept walking, but his steps were quicker now. His heart was still pounding. Every sound, a barking dog, a car door slamming, made him flinch. He turned down his street, finally away from the crowd and flashing lights. He tried to breathe normally, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying it. The looks, the tone, the way one of them had rested a hand on his holster. He hadn't done anything wrong. He knew that. But it didn't matter. For a few long minutes, he had been seen as something else, someone dangerous. When he reached his house, he stood at the door for a long second before going in. The smell of food drifted from the kitchen. It was warm and safe inside, but his hands were still trembling. He took off his hoodie and sat on the couch, staring at nothing for a while. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mom. "On my way home soon. Everything okay?" He stared at the screen, unsure what to type. Finally, he wrote back, "Yeah, just tired." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Outside, the world looked calm again. The golden light had faded into a soft blue dusk and the first stars were appearing. But inside him, something had shifted. He didn't know how to explain it, not yet. All he knew was that for a few minutes that afternoon, walking home from practice had stopped being simple. It had become something else, a moment he would never forget. The next morning, the sun came through the blinds, but the boy didn't want to get out of bed. His alarm had gone off twice, yet he stayed still, staring at the ceiling. He kept thinking about the flashing lights, the way those officers had looked at him. It felt like a bad dream he couldn't shake off. His phone buzzed again, a message from his best friend asking if he was coming to school. He typed back a quick, "Yeah, I'll be there," and pushed himself to get ready. At breakfast, his mother was already dressed for work, her jacket neatly pressed, her badge clipped to her side. She worked long hours and always seemed calm, always in control. "Morning," she said with a smile. "You okay? You look tired." He forced a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long practice yesterday." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "Don't push yourself too hard. You need rest too." He wanted to tell her what happened and how the police had stopped him for no reason, but he hesitated. She was already thinking about work, about her cases. He didn't want to worry her, not when she looked so peaceful for once. So he kept quiet and ate his cereal. The ride to school was quiet. His mother dropped him off like always, telling him to be good and call if you need anything. He waved and walked toward the gate. But the noise of the cars and the chatter of students felt different that morning. He noticed things he never used to, like the way some people stared too long or how the security guard's eyes followed him as he passed. Maybe it had always been that way, but now he couldn't unsee it. At lunch, his friends were joking around, throwing fries at each other, laughing loud. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. When one of them said, "Dude, you good?" "You seem off," he shrugged. "Just tired, man." It was easier than explaining the truth, but the truth stayed heavy in his chest all day. Every time he walked past a police car parked near the school, his stomach tightened. The sound of sirens made him flinch. Even walking home, he found himself checking over his shoulder more than once. He took the same route as yesterday, but this time he noticed every detail. The cracked sidewalk, the mailboxes, the old man watering his plants. He wanted to believe nothing bad could happen again, that yesterday had just been a mistake. But halfway down the block, he saw another police car turning onto the street. His steps slowed. The car rolled past him this time, but his body stayed tense until it disappeared. When he got home, his mom wasn't there yet. He dropped his bag on the couch and sat quietly. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene, the commands, the tone, the cold look in their eyes. He wondered if they even realized what they had done to him. To them, it was probably just another stop, another name on a report. But to him, it had changed something deep inside. A few minutes later, the front door opened. His mother walked in, her face tired but warm. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, setting down her bag. "How was school?" He hesitated, then said softly, "It was fine." She walked over and looked at him closely. "You sure?" He nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. "You've been quiet since last night," she said. "Something happened?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. "Mom," he began, his voice small. "If something happened with the police, would you be mad?" Her expression changed instantly. "What do you mean?" He looked down. "Yesterday, on my way home, 2 cops stopped me. They said I fit a description. They made me put my hands up, told me not to move. People were watching. His words came faster now. I didn't do anything, Mom. I was just walking. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she took a deep breath, her face tightening with anger and worry. Did they touch you? He shook his head. No, but they looked at me like I was a criminal. One of them had his hand on his gun. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Did you get their names or badge numbers? No, I just wanted to go home. She nodded slowly, her jaw clenched. You did the right thing. But they had no reason to stop you. None. He looked up, surprised by the mix of calm and fire in her voice. What are you going to do? She didn't answer right away. She sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. Listen to me, she said softly. You did everything right. You stayed calm. But this shouldn't have happened. I've seen things like this too many times at work. And it hits different when it's your own child. He frowned. You think they stopped me because of how I look? She didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, they saw a young black boy walking alone and assumed you were trouble. It's not right, but it's the truth. The words hung in the air. He didn't know what to say. He'd heard about these things on the news, seen the headlines, but he never thought it would happen to him. Not here, not in their neighborhood. His mother stood and walked toward the kitchen. I need their names, she said quietly. I'll find out who was on patrol yesterday. Mom, you don't have to, he said quickly. It's over. She turned back to him. It's not over. It's never over if no one speaks up. Her voice softened. I'm not just your mom right now. I'm someone who knows the law. And they broke it. He didn't argue, but his stomach twisted with worry. He knew what his mom did for work, but he'd never seen her like this, focused, sharp, but also emotional. She spent the rest of the evening making calls, looking through her laptop, typing quickly. Every so often, she'd glance over at him and give a small, reassuring smile. Later that night, he sat on his bed, scrolling through his phone. Someone from the neighborhood had posted a short video clip, just a few seconds long, showing him standing there with the police. It had already been shared dozens of times. His name wasn't mentioned, but people in the comments were guessing who he was. Some defended him, others didn't. Reading it made him feel exposed, like everyone could see the fear he had tried so hard to hide. He put the phone down and stared at the wall. He didn't want to be known for this. He didn't want to be a video online. He just wanted to go back to being himself, the kid who played ball after school and joked with his friends. His mom knocked gently on the door. You okay? Yeah, he said, though he wasn't. She came in, sat beside him, and said quietly, I talked to a few people at work. I know who they were, and I also know this isn't the first time they've done something like this. He looked at her. What happens now? I'm going to handle it, she said simply, but I need you to focus on being a kid. You hear me? Let me deal with them. He nodded and she pulled him into a hug. For a moment he felt safe again, wrapped in the kind of love that could shield him from anything. But deep down he knew that something between him and the world had changed forever. That night, as he drifted to sleep, his dreams were filled with flashing lights, echoing voices, and the sound of his mother's calm but steady tone saying, You did nothing wrong. He wanted to believe her, he really did. But the image of those officers' cold stares kept returning, a reminder that sometimes being innocent wasn't enough. Outside his window, the street looked peaceful again. But for him, that peace no longer felt real. It was like the world had tilted slightly, and he was still trying to find his balance. He didn't know that in a few days everything would change again, and this time his mother's calm voice wouldn't just defend him. It would stop the world around them cold. The following afternoon felt like any other day at first. The sky was a deep blue and the air smelled faintly of rain even though the clouds had cleared. The boy was sitting in his last class, tapping his pencil on the desk, half listening to the teacher go over homework. He was counting the minutes until the bell rang, ready to head home. But his mother was thinking about something else entirely. At her office, she was sitting behind her desk, her badge glinting faintly under the light. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had spent the past 2 nights gathering details about the officers who had stopped her son. The more she learned, the more her anger grew. Not the loud kind, but the kind that burned slow and steady. She had spoken to people who worked in the same department, pulled up patrol reports, and confirmed that the stop hadn't been recorded properly. There was no official reason given, just a vague description of suspicious activity. She stared at the report on her screen and took a deep breath. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was an agent who knew the rules, who had seen how easily power could be abused. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Yes, this is Special Agent Johnson," she said firmly. "I need to meet with your department head today. It's important." By the time school let out, she was already driving toward the neighborhood. Her mind raced with a mix of fury and focus. She had planned to confront them calmly, but deep down she wasn't sure how she'd react when she saw them face to face. Meanwhile, her son walked home as usual, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He was more alert now, scanning every car that passed. The world just didn't feel the same. Halfway home, he pulled out his phone to text his mom. Heading home now. He didn't know that she was already only a few blocks away. The street was quiet except for the sound of distant traffic. Then suddenly a familiar noise broke through, the low hum of a police cruiser. The boy looked up and froze. The same car from before turned the corner. His heart dropped. 2 officers stepped out. The same ones. The taller one adjusted his belt and looked right at him. "Hey, you again," the officer said, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "Didn't expect to see you around here." The boy's pulse quickened. "I live here," he said softly. "Yeah, that's what you said last time," the other officer replied, taking a step closer. "You sure you're not hanging around where you shouldn't be?" "I'm just walking home," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The taller one gave a small smirk. "Let's see that bag again." The boy felt the same fear rise up in his chest as before. He didn't move. His eyes darted toward the houses nearby. Someone was on their porch again, watching. A couple of kids across the street slowed their bikes. The moment felt too familiar, too heavy. Then the sound of a car pulling up fast broke the silence. A dark sedan stopped hard at the curb and the door swung open. The officers turned to look. Out stepped a woman in a dark suit, her ID clipped to her belt. Her stride was sharp, confident. She didn't hesitate for a second. "Officers," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Can you tell me why you're detaining my son again?" The officers froze. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mom?" he whispered. One of the officers blinked. "Your son?" She nodded, holding up her badge so they could see. "Yes, Special Agent Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The letters on the badge caught the light. "Now explain to me exactly why my child is being stopped for the second time in 2 days." The taller officer cleared his throat, suddenly unsure. Ma'am, we were just what?" She interrupted, her voice still even but cold. "Profiling him again. Harassing a teenager walking home from school?" She stepped closer, her eyes locked on them. "Because I'm looking at your body cams right now and I don't see any threat here." The officers exchanged nervous glances. The second one stammered, "We thought he looked like someone from—" She held up her hand. "Don't finish that sentence unless you have evidence. You already detained him yesterday without cause. You're repeating that mistake today, and this time you're doing it in front of witnesses." One of the neighbors, realizing who she was, started recording again. A small crowd was forming, people whispering and pointing. The officers seemed frozen in place, caught between protocol and panic. Her son stood still, not knowing whether to feel relieved or scared. His mother's calm was something he'd never seen like this before. She wasn't shouting, but her presence filled the entire street. "I want your names," she said quietly, "and your supervisor's contact information, now." The taller officer shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "I wasn't asking," she said, her tone cutting through his words like glass. "You're obligated by law to identify yourselves during a stop. You know that." "Don't make this worse." The officer hesitated, then reluctantly gave his name and badge number. She repeated it aloud, making sure everyone around could hear. Then she did the same with the second officer. "Good," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'll be following up with internal affairs. You'll be hearing from my office within 24 hours. Her son watched silently as his mother took control of the scene with precision. The officers stood stiffly, unsure what to do. Finally, one of them muttered, "We're sorry for the misunderstanding." She turned toward her son, her expression softening slightly. "Get in the car, sweetheart." He obeyed, clutching his backpack tightly. She waited until he was safely inside before looking back at the officers. "If either of you ever stops my son again without a lawful reason," she said quietly, "you'll be answering not just to me but to a federal inquiry. Am I clear?" They nodded silently. The neighbors were still watching. Someone clapped softly, though most people just stood there in stunned silence. The flashing lights turned off. The officers walked back to their car, avoiding her eyes. As she got into her car, she glanced at her son, who was sitting quietly, still shaken. She started the engine and took a slow breath before driving off. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. The tension in the car was thick. Finally, he said softly, "I didn't know you were coming." "I tracked your phone when you texted," she replied. "Something told me to check on you." He looked out the window, watching the houses go by. "I thought it was over after the first time." She shook her head. "I thought so too. But sometimes people don't learn until they're forced to." They drove in silence again, both lost in thought. She glanced at him from time to time. The same boy she had tucked in at night, taught to be polite, to study hard, to stay safe. And yet, none of that had protected him from being seen as a suspect. The thought made her chest tighten. When they got home, he went straight to his room, dropping his bag on the floor. His mother sat at the kitchen table, typing on her laptop, documenting everything that had happened. She wanted it all on record: the time, the place, the names, the witnesses. Every detail mattered. Her hands shook slightly as she typed, but her face stayed composed. She had dealt with high-stakes cases before, but nothing compared to the fear she'd felt seeing those officers standing over her son again. She had to remind herself to breathe. Upstairs, the boy sat on his bed, staring at his phone. Notifications were piling up. Messages from friends, videos being shared. People were already talking about the confrontation. But for once, he didn't care about the attention. All he could think about was the look on his mother's face, that calm, steady anger that could silence a whole street. He realized then that his mom wasn't just strong because of her job. She was strong because she had to be, not just for herself, but for him. As night fell, the house grew quiet. His mother finally closed her laptop and went to check on him. He was half asleep, his face peaceful for the first time in days. She brushed a hand over his hair and whispered, "You're safe now." But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. The story had just begun, and by morning, the whole world would know what had happened on that street. The next day began with quiet tension. The morning air felt heavier than usual, as if the whole house could sense what was coming. The boy sat at the kitchen table, staring at his breakfast but barely eating. His mother stood by the counter, typing something on her laptop while taking phone calls. Her voice was calm but sharp, the tone of someone who had made up her mind. She had already filed a formal complaint, attached the body cam timestamps, and spoken to a federal contact she trusted. The story had started to spread online overnight. Neighbors had posted the video of her confronting the officers, and it had taken off faster than anyone expected. The clip was short, barely a minute, but powerful. It showed everything: the flashing lights, her calm but commanding voice, the officers frozen in place. People across the city were sharing it with captions like, "This is what strength looks like," and "A mother who stood up for her son." The boy's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from classmates and friends. Some were supportive, saying how proud they were of him. Others just wanted details, asking questions that made him uncomfortable. He didn't know how to respond. He hadn't done anything special. He had just been scared. When his mother finished her call, she looked over at him. "You don't have to go to school today if you don't want to," she said softly. "It might be a lot right now," he nodded quietly. "Everyone's talking about it anyway." She gave him a small smile, though her eyes were tired. "Let them talk. You didn't do anything wrong. People need to see what really happens." The rest of the morning passed slowly. She made more calls, took notes, and checked emails. He sat on the couch, flipping channels, trying to distract himself. Every news station seemed to be talking about it. One anchor said a local teen was wrongfully stopped by police twice in the same week, until his mother, a federal agent, stepped in. Hearing those words out loud felt strange. He didn't like being called a local teen. It made him sound like a headline, not a person. By afternoon, there was a knock at the door. His mother opened it to find 2 police department supervisors standing there. They looked nervous. Both wore polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Agent Johnson," one said. "We'd like to speak with you about what happened yesterday." She crossed her arms. "Come in." They stepped inside, glancing around the living room before sitting down. The boy stayed on the couch, watching silently. The taller supervisor cleared his throat. First, we want to apologize for what your son experienced. The department takes these matters seriously. His mother didn't move. Do you? She asked quietly. The man shifted uncomfortably. We reviewed the footage. It seems there was a miscommunication. Her voice stayed even. No, it wasn't a miscommunication. It was a pattern. Those officers acted on bias, and you know it. If I hadn't shown up, who knows how far it would have gone? The other supervisor spoke up quickly. We understand your frustration, Agent Johnson, and we're addressing it internally. She leaned forward slightly. Internally doesn't cut it. I've already reported this to the Office of Professional Responsibility. And I've spoken to local news outlets because this isn't just about my son. It's about accountability. The supervisors exchanged nervous glances. One tried to smooth things over. If we could just discuss a way to resolve this, she cut him off. The only resolution I want is change. Training, discipline, and honesty. You can't fix what you refuse to face. There was silence for a moment. The boy watched his mother, amazed at how calm she remained. Her voice never rose, but every word carried weight. The supervisors finally nodded, promising to look into it further, then stood to leave. Before they stepped out, she said firmly, "And make sure those officers know to stay away from my son." When the door closed behind them, the boy finally exhaled. They didn't even look sorry, he said. His mother sighed, rubbing her temples. They're not used to being called out by someone who knows the system. But they will be. That evening, as the sun went down, their street was quieter than usual. A few neighbors stopped by to drop off food or words of support. We saw the video, one woman said softly. You handled it with so much grace. His mother thanked her, though she looked more tired than proud. Later, when the house was quiet again, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The boy joined her, sitting beside her in silence. The air smelled of rain again, the sky darkening with distant thunder. Mom, he said quietly. Did you ever have something like that happen to you? She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yes, when I was your age, actually. I was stopped walking home from a library. They said I looked like someone who'd run from a fight. I remember feeling small even though I'd done nothing wrong. That's when I decided to learn the law. I wanted to know how to stand up for myself and for others. He looked at her, listening closely. And you did, she smiled faintly. I tried. And now it's my job. But it still hurts when it happens to someone you love. They sat quietly, watching the rain begin to fall. He thought about what she said, about the strength it took to stay calm in moments like that. He wasn't sure he could ever be that strong. The next morning, she got a call from the local police chief asking to meet in person. She agreed, though her tone made it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. When she arrived at the station, reporters were already waiting outside. Microphones pointed her way, cameras flashing. Someone shouted, Agent Johnson, do you plan to press charges? She didn't stop walking, just said, I plan to make sure this doesn't happen again to anyone. Inside, the chief met her with a strained smile. Agent Johnson, we want to sincerely apologize for what your family went through. The situation was unacceptable. Unacceptable is one word for it, she replied calmly. Illegal would be another. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. She presented her case clearly, professionally, and without emotion, just facts, evidence, and expectation. The chief promised an investigation, but she had seen enough of these to know how slowly they moved. Still, her presence had made an impact. Everyone in that building knew this wouldn't be swept under the rug. When she returned home, her son was waiting by the window. How did it go? He asked. They're looking into it, she said. And I'm not stopping until I see change. He nodded slowly. Everyone at school's talking about it now. Some of them said they didn't realize stuff like that still happened. His mother sighed softly. That's why it's important people see. Awareness is the first step, but it shouldn't have to take something like this for people to believe it. That night, they ate dinner together quietly. The house felt both safe and heavy. The world outside seemed to have shifted a little, like the truth was finally being noticed, even if only for a moment. The boy didn't feel invisible anymore, but he didn't feel free either. Just aware. Before bed, his mom checked in on him again. You okay? She asked. He thought about it, then nodded. Yeah, just wish it didn't happen. She knelt beside him, brushing his shoulder gently. I wish that too. But sometimes what happens to us can open eyes we didn't even know were closed. What you went through, it wasn't fair, but it's making people pay attention. He didn't say anything, but her words stayed with him. When she turned off the light, he lay awake, listening to the rain outside. It wasn't the same fear as before. It was something quieter, like determination. Downstairs, his mother sat at her desk, typing up another report. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was steady. She wasn't doing this just for him anymore. She was doing it for every kid who had ever felt small under flashing lights. The story was spreading beyond their city now. Journalists were calling. Civil rights groups were reaching out. The fight was no longer just theirs. It had become something larger. She looked at the photo on her desk, one of her sons smiling in his basketball uniform, and whispered, "This is for you." The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows, but she didn't stop working. For the first time in days, she didn't feel helpless. She felt ready. The morning after the storm, the air felt clear and sharp. The sky stretched wide and blue, the kind of morning that made everything look new again. The boy woke up early, not because he had to, but because he couldn't sleep any longer. For the first time in a while, he felt something like peace. Not full peace, but a small piece of it. He went downstairs and found his mother already awake. She sat by the window with her coffee, reading through her phone. The light from the screen reflected off her tired eyes. He could tell she hadn't slept much either. "Morning," he said softly. She looked up and smiled. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Better," he said after a moment. "I think," she nodded, sipping her coffee. "It's been a long week." "Yeah," he said quietly. "It feels like a month." She chuckled lightly, then set her phone aside. "You've been really brave, you know," he shrugged. "I didn't feel brave. I just wanted it to stop." "That's how it starts," she said. "You want it to stop. Then you learn how to make sure it doesn't happen again." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the neighborhood wake up. The street was calm again. No flashing lights, no shouting, no cameras. Just the sound of cars starting and birds calling from the trees. Then her phone buzzed again. She checked it, frowning slightly. "It's a request," she said. "The city council wants me to speak tomorrow. About everything that happened." He blinked. "You mean like, in front of everyone?" She nodded. "They want to start a new review process for police conduct. I guess they want a federal perspective." He looked down at the table. "You're really going to do it?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because if I don't, someone else will tell the story for us and they'll get it wrong." The next day, the city hall was packed. Reporters filled the front rows, microphones pointed toward the podium. The boy sat near the back, next to a few neighbors who had come to show support. His mother stood at the front, her posture calm, her face steady. When she began to speak, her voice was firm but gentle. "Last week, my son was stopped by police officers for no reason. Twice, he was not a suspect. He was not breaking the law. He was just walking home. What happened that night is not a misunderstanding. It's a symptom of something deeper." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. The boy felt every eye on her. She continued, "I am a federal agent. I've worked with law enforcement for over a decade. I know how good officers operate. I also know how bias, whether conscious or not, can poison good intentions. My son's fear that night is something no child should have to feel. And my position shouldn't be the reason he's safe. Every child deserves that protection." Her words were simple, but they carried power. The cameras clicked. The room stayed silent. Even those who had come just for headlines seemed to listen closely. She finished with a promise. "I will continue to work with this city to ensure accountability and transparency. This is not about blame, it's about building trust again. And that starts with honesty." When she stepped away from the podium, the room broke into quiet applause. It wasn't loud, but it was real. The boy felt something in his chest loosen. For the first time, he didn't just feel like a part of a story. He felt like a part of change. After the meeting, reporters surrounded her, but she kept her answers short. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about what comes next." That night, they returned home to find cards and letters on their doorstep. Some were from strangers who had seen the video, thanking her for standing up. Others were from parents who wrote about their own fears for their children. Each note seemed to say the same thing in different words. "Thank you for speaking when others couldn't." As they read through the messages together, the boy looked at his mother. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts small, like a seed. You plant it, you water it, and you hope it grows. He nodded, not fully understanding but liking the way she said it. It felt honest. In the days that followed, life slowly began to return to normal, or something close to it. The video still floated around online, but the attention had shifted to the larger discussion it had started. Schools held assemblies about bias and community. The police department announced new training sessions and an internal review board that would include civilian voices. At school, some kids who had never spoken to him before came up to say they were sorry for what happened. Others asked questions, unsure what to say. He didn't mind. He was learning that silence could be just as powerful as words when it came from understanding. One afternoon, his mother picked him up from school and, as they drove home, he noticed something on a building wall near the park. It was a mural, freshly painted. It showed a woman standing between a young boy and two police officers. She wasn't angry. She was calm, strong, unshaken. Beneath the image were the words, "Stand firm in truth." He stared at it for a while, then smiled. "That's you," he said. His mother glanced over, smiling softly. "That's us," she corrected. That night they sat outside again, watching the sun dip low over the rooftops. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it felt like a small corner of it had started to shift. The boy turned to his mother. "Do you ever wish none of this happened?" She thought about it. "Every day. But then I remember, sometimes the hardest things make way for the most important ones." He nodded slowly. "I guess I get that," she smiled, brushing his shoulder. "You will. You already do." As night settled in, they went inside. She turned off her laptop for the first time in days. They watched a movie together. Something light and funny, something that made them laugh. It felt good to laugh again. Later, when the boy went to bed, he looked out the window and saw the quiet street below. The same street that had once been filled with sirens and fear now seemed peaceful. The world wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hopeless either. Downstairs, his mother sat by her desk, looking through one last email. It was from a young officer who had watched her city council speech. The message read, "Agent Johnson, I saw what happened and I want to thank you. Your words made me realize how much work we still have to do. I want to be part of that change." She read it twice, then smiled. Maybe that was the seed she had talked about. Maybe it was already starting to grow. When she finally turned off the light, the house was quiet. Outside, the streetlight glowed softly, the same one that had once illuminated a night full of fear. But now it just shone, steady, calm, familiar. The boy slept soundly for the first time in weeks. His mother lay awake for a while, listening to the silence, feeling both tired and grateful. She knew there would be more work ahead, more conversations, more resistance, more days when change felt too slow. But she also knew they had made a start, and sometimes that was enough. In the morning, she'd go back to work. He'd go back to school. Life would keep moving forward. But neither of them would ever forget the night everything changed and how, through courage and calm, they had helped make it mean something more. Because what began as fear had turned into something stronger. Understanding, truth, and the quiet power of standing up. Not just for one moment, but for all the moments that followed.